speed. Beautiful. 26, 36 feet per second up. 5 for the pitch over. Very smooth.
After 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon, a perfect liftoff, and the astronauts are now in lunar orbit, ready to join for the journey home. Good evening. The first men on the moon lifted off on the first stage of their journey home an hour and 6 minutes ago. The Stars and Stripes flies proudly now over the Sea of Tranquility. A new chapter in human history has opened. The race for the moon is over. Man's probe into the universe has begun. For the people of this planet, what is the meaning of this stupendous venture, historically, scientifically, and economically? That's our theme in Panorama tonight, and we'll keep you in touch with Apollo 11. By 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, the astronauts should be homeward bound with a cargo of moon dust and a few secrets of the universe. Michael Charlton is now at Houston to talk, perhaps in a moment, we hope, with the head of the space agency, the man who put the men on the moon. And here in London, Geoffrey Pardo is standing by to explain anything that may happen while Panorama is on the air. And James Mossman ponders the significance of this American triumph with economist Barbara Ward, historian Professor Hugh Trevor Roper, scientist and Nobel Prize winner Professor George Porter, and science fiction writer Brian Aldiss. But first, if we have it, we go over to Michael Charlton, but I think there may be a little problem. Yes. Well, now, before we go over to Michael Charlton, we'll look at some of the issues which arise out of discussion of this project. You may have heard Michael Charlton telling us last night how 50 or so poverty protesters demonstrated quietly outside Mission Control Center, not to decry the astronauts' achievements, but to remind everyone of the unsolved problems here on Earth. Is there a conflict between devoting vast resources to the endless exploration of space and the need to conquer the appalling problems of this planet? Disease and deprivation, ignorance and squalor. Well, now that the moon race has been run and won, a look at the arguments by Julian Pettifer.
To most of us, man's breathtaking adventure in space looks like a pinnacle of human achievement. But in other eyes, it's quite the reverse. These celestial antics are, in their view, a confirmation of man's folly and vanity and urge to self-destruction.
How is the quality of the TV?
In drawing up a balance sheet, what are the Americans getting for their 10,000 million pound ticket to the moon? The most obvious answer is prestige. The Stars and Stripes stuck in the moon dust. That proprietary plaque. President Nixon down the line from the White House. It all recalls what triggered the moon program in the first place, President Kennedy's fear of being overtaken by the Russians. And so naturally this morning, it was the Americans first, mankind second, and the Russians also ran.
To bring peace and tranquility to Earth.
But American prestige aside, space does provide some down-to-earth benefits for the rest of us. Notably, the photographs taken by the astronauts and by unmanned satellites, bird's-eye views of our own planet, which have opened up entirely new areas of research into the Earth's resources. The analysis of pictures taken hundreds of miles out in space can reveal new mineral deposits. They've already led to the discovery of new oil fields. In agriculture, satellite pictures can provide data on erosion and irrigation, and their value to the weather forecaster is already established. Soon, urban planners may be using astronauts' photographs to help them plan road systems. Perhaps the most obvious of the benefits of space technology is in the field of communications. Television coverage of the moonshot during the past few days has been brought to us by communications satellite like this one here. But of course the value of worldwide television will depend on how it's employed. It would be ironic, if not altogether unexpected, if its potential is used for American and Russian propaganda or for global viewing of the adventures of Lassie. The other immediate benefits, which you and I can thank the American space program for, come into the area of technological spin-off. Space engineering, as in the construction of this otherworld lunar bug, has made such unusual demands on the scientists, has extended their capabilities in so many directions that their discoveries have advanced the design of everything from computers to non-stick saucepans. Even space medicine, specialized though it may be, has developed diagnostic aids and safety devices that have already saved lives. If the technological superiority stimulated by the space program is so great, how can any advanced industrial country compete without it? Is British industry going to suffer from not being in the space race?
We are losing out in quite a few ways at the moment. Firstly, one must realize that space technology is the greatest technological challenge of any projects around the world today. And although we're active in one or two selected areas of space, we're missing out the stimulus that the whole of industry that engages in America, in 22,000 different companies involved in their space program, for example, we're losing out on the stimulus which they have to generally improve reliability and performance of all the components and all the equipment, etc. Now, the other way we're losing out is this. Quite apart from the technology, the act of learning, we're losing out from not having products available to use. And in particular, I'm talking of application satellites. That's to say, satellites for telecommunication purposes, for air traffic control, navigation, meteorological purposes, and Earth resource satellites, which are coming along to monitor and help to use the resources of the world.
Not everyone is convinced that Britain is missing out, because not everyone is convinced that space is important at all. To some people, the moon program is dangerously irrelevant to mankind's real problems like hunger and poverty. And so at Wednesday's launch at Cape Kennedy, not all the spectators were there to applaud.
We are here to protest, and we are here to demonstrate. We are here to say that what we can do for space and exploration, we must do, and we demand that we do the very same for starving poor people.
Well, we have a society now that's in great danger, that doesn't know how to control the enormous nuclear powers it possesses, which goes on busily manufacturing bacterial weapons of genocide, which has polluted the living environment and is rapidly destroying organic life. And instead of attending to these first problems and making the planet habitable and reducing some kind of order in man's own life, or achieving some kind of order, we go off on an escapist expedition to other planets, carrying all our mischiefs, all our malice, all our irrationalities into outer space. How much help is this going to do the millions who are suffering from these imbecilities?
Of course, there are idealists on either side of the argument. Quite apart from the scientific achievement, some people see man's arrival on the moon as a supreme victory for the human spirit that will herald some kind of new age. They liken the journey of Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins to the explorations of Marco Polo and Columbus that gave to Europe 500 years ago a new concept of the world and of man's place in it, a concept that had a profound effect on philosophy and the arts, as well as upon the sciences. Man's venture into space, they feel, may stimulate another renaissance and give Earth as different an image of itself as the one those early explorers brought back to the old world.
Well, we'll take up some of those points with our Moon Day Brains Trust a little later. But now we have found the satellite and Michael Charlton and the man who put the men on the moon. Over now to Houston.
Where Dr. Payne, as you can see, is with us. He had a rather late lift-off from mission control, but we forgive him that, and there's this enormous accomplishment that he, his team, and his astronauts have brought off. Dr. Payne, we must look at you as head of the American space program, and all your engineers now and astronauts with some awe, and pay, I suppose, a great deal more attention to what you've been saying for a good deal of time. I wonder, could you expand your own mind for us in the next couple of minutes over what you believe is implicit in this triumph of Apollo 11 on Earth?
I think that the triumph of Apollo 11 means many things to many people. It would be almost presumptuous of me to tell other people what impact this should have on men's minds around the world. I think we're all still adjusting to it. We all knew it was coming, and yet there's an unreality about it that we simply are still studying. I think that, Michael, if there's one impression that is recurring, it's that of question. In view of the fact that man has achieved this, and this has been an achievement of mankind, the question is raised as people all over the world have this common aspiration, common question, common dream. Why aren't our political institutions more tuned in to bringing to people around the world this great common aspiration which we all have, world peace, freedom from hunger and ignorance and disease? Why can't we do better in many of these other areas as we reach out and touch the moon?
How do you answer that yourself?
I think that we must be willing to accept the same kinds of rates of change in the intellectual, philosophical, social world, perhaps, that we are seeing in the world of technology today. We must be ready and to be bolder in our aspirations. We should be setting ourselves much tougher goals that men of goodwill around the world can measure themselves against. I think that we haven't really been sufficiently challenging to ourselves. I would hope that the people of the world will now demand more of their government in many areas.
But you see, it seems to me that a large part of modern politics is going against this brilliant kind of achievement of which an elite like yourselves is capable of. That people are starting to resent the ruthless efficiency and what some of them would call the brutality of progress. Now, do you believe that this is a factor which is going to bring your kind of world and this reactionary world, I suppose you would call it, into collision?
I don't think they'll be in collision. I think that if we can throw them into competition, if we can ask why social goals cannot be set for the next decade with the same boldness that we are now proceeding to set our future goals in space, that the visit of man to the moon will indeed have accomplished far more than the mere technological triumph which it represents.
Can we be a little bit more specific about what you think the technology that put the Apollo 11 on the moon may mean here on Earth? And I was talking to one of your own people here the other day, the man who runs the state network of communications. And I said, you know, if Eisenhower had these wonderful communications in Europe during the Second World War, where would his headquarters have been? And he said, well, it wouldn't matter. It could have been anywhere on Earth. Now, isn't this going to make great military changes? Isn't it going to concentrate power in very few hands?
It's quite possible, but I would hope that the question of the military tactical value, that the question of whether Eisenhower should even have been invading Europe is a much more fundamental question. It seems to me that this triumph of mankind, which we've all participated in, really should make people pause and think. Today's a national holiday in the United States. People around the world are pausing to think. I would like to have them consider some of these questions.
Another thing Mr. Covington said was that handwriting may well be redundant in 15 years or so, that these electronics of yours, you'll be able to voice print and give perfect privacy to people so that they can write their letters electronically, so to speak.
I think that the question of where modern technology can and will take us is one that all of us that are in the forefront of this and engulfed in it see very clearly. Enormous changes are possible. The ability to throw signals around the world, the ability to learn much more about nature, to bring many more amenities to mankind is certainly there. The fundamental question is, what will man choose to do with this technology? We certainly will choose to explore the solar system. We will choose to extend our abode from the surface of Earth on out towards the stars. But what about here on Earth? what are we going to be satisfied with respect to the applications that man himself will make of the technology? Will it be the new weapon systems that you speak of that will allow our military commanders to juice with each other with longer and longer lances? That would certainly be a trivial and unfortunate application of the tremendous technological advances that are now within our grasp.
You don't take that pessimistic view yourself.
Well, I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, Michael. I try to be realistic about these things, but I would just suggest that people pause now and ponder these things. People around the world who have watched this tremendous event of man first reaching out, if you like, touching the stars. What is man that he has done this? Is the question that Pope Paul has raised. I think a very fine. What is the destiny of man? Is it to develop these better technological systems for our mutual annihilation? I cannot believe that that will prove to be the case. But let's get at it and see to it that it's not.
You see, another speculation, and perhaps you could offer Europe, old Europe, which started this geographical expansion of man. And what would you tell us about the management techniques? Have you achieved, do you believe, a breakthrough in management techniques which has made this possible?
I think that I could almost subsume all of this talk about better management into the question of courage. It seems to me that the courage of the astronauts in the space program of the United States has been matched by the courage of the political leaders, of the managers, of the technicians, of the engineers and scientists. It's been a great triumph, I think, of boldness, of willing to press ahead in the face of the unknown, to take very great risks politically, intellectually, in the engineering sense, and in the personal sense.
But if you had to name a single ingredient that was absent elsewhere in the world and was obviously present here in your ability to bring all these things together and run them, as you've run them in NASA, in the space program, what would you say that ingredient is?
Well, I think we've evolved a political system in the United States. I think the political system has evolved in the Soviet Union, which allows hundreds of millions of people spread across a vast continent with vast resources to band themselves together in a common purpose. This is what management, this is what leadership is all about. I think this is a challenge indeed to Europe. At the same time, it isn't clear to me that Europe needs to participate in the exploration of space and many other very important things which Europe does.
Well, this is important because what direction would you say that Europe ought to follow now? Because I think a lot of people in Europe will have a feeling of deprivation after this Apollo flight. The feeling that, well, there's never going to be a British or perhaps even a European astronaut. I'd like to know if you feel that is right, first of all. And what direction you feel that a European space effort should take, and is it capable of taking it?
Well, I think that's a very parochial question, Michael. I think that what we have just witnessed has been a triumph of all mankind, which Europe has participated in to the same extent that we have. We happen to have used a political system in the free world in which the resources of this mighty continent were the ones that we threw together. There are an awful lot of British accents here in Houston mixed in with the Texas accent. The tracking stations around the world, Australia, South Africa, Spain, many places have participated in this, the scientists and engineers around the world. I don't think that Europe has to feel that this was not a European achievement. Perhaps they did it via Columbus, the New World, and the United States culture, which essentially is a European culture.
So this comes back to the point you made before. Unless people feel they can participate in decisions, they will feel a feeling of deprivation. And I would imagine that Europe might continue to feel like this in the future. It is not part of this except vicariously.
We could imagine a world in which Europe would be perhaps run in a political system more like the United States, where we would try to reduce the differences between individual states into some sort of a super government. I think if we went this direction, there'd be a danger that we'd be approaching an Orwell 1984 cultural homogeneity that perhaps would represent a great net loss for the world. I certainly don't think that we have to think in terms of vast super governments to do super projects. I think the present diversity in Europe is perhaps a great contribution to the world.
But do you not understand the feeling that people have in Europe, that they're sandwiched between two great superpowers, and they don't regard this as necessarily a satisfactory arrangement?
Well, perhaps they're sandwiched between two rather bland white slices of bread, and all the diversity is in the middle, Michael. Maybe that's the way that it ought to be.
And what's going to be the cost, would you say, of dropping out? Is it going to be possible to take a too detached view of this and leave it entirely to you and the Russians? What is the cost of not specializing?
That's not happening. Professor Bondi and the people in the European Space Research Operation are doing some tremendous things right now with satellites. We are flying experiments. You saw the Sleaze experiment last night on the surface of the moon. I think this is something that increasingly we should be banding together to do, and I'm sure this will happen.
Do you, one final question along these lines.
Well, we seem to have lost the satellite vision. I think we'll go on listening perhaps to the sound of it, if we can have a picture. I'll just find out. Oh, have they? Righto. Thanks very much. Well, it's only the astronauts who have perfect communication in this age. For good or ill, men have landed on the moon, and those rocks on the Sea of Tranquility are only the stepping stones to yet more fantastic and more expensive ventures into the unknown. Heroic? Historic? Yes. But is it worth it? James Mossman.
Well, lady and gentlemen, we'll go into what Thomas Paine was saying later and take up some of those points. First, can I have an immediate reaction from all of you? When you saw those two spacemen walking and kicking about and jumping about in the dust on the moon, what was your real, considered and authentic reaction? Lady Jackson.
Well, it seemed to me that it's possible that man has a destiny that goes outside this planet, and that this is the first sign of him beginning to take it into account.
Professor Porter.
I think my main feeling was that anything is technologically possible, providing we know the scientific background, which of course dates way back to Galileo.
So you didn't feel surprised then?
Of course, I think this is the main reaction, that there is no surprise.
Or did you feel any sense of wonder?
Great wonder, but one was wonder that one was seeing something which one had been waiting for since one was a little boy.
Brian Aldiss.
Very much the same. I thought, at last we've made it. You know, man's 1 million years old, and this is a very old dream indeed. At last, well, it's come true. The neocortex that powers us has finally realized this very old dream. And now we have these Ford T models down there on the moon and up again. Marvelous, but not unexpected.
Professor Trevor Roper.
I felt like Professor Porter. I can't say that I was surprised. There had been a build-up, one had expected it, and here it was at last. It was a new stage in human history, undoubtedly, and one was seeing it happening. One just watched.
Do you feel, though, that the achievement, technical achievement, and the achievement in terrific sort of courage and discipline will make any difference to man's sense of unity on Earth or his sense of justice?
No, frankly, I do not.
No, I find I disagree with that very much, because I think it's the first time that the human race has been able to see in its imagination where it actually lives, and how small, and how shining, and how real it is, and how vulnerable. And if it's true that we change nothing until we change our imagination, I think it's possible that this is the first step towards changing how we think about ourselves.
How, but in a way, I suppose, one sees a baby, and that's vulnerable enough. It's even more vulnerable than a shining orb in heaven, isn't it? That hasn't stopped us killing people. So.
No, but the thing is, we're all on this orb, and this orb is all we have. In other words, this is where everybody has got to make their life. That is more my feeling.
I think it will have a slight, will have some effect eventually on man's sense of unity. Firstly, in the very slow process of feeling that there is something bigger outside our little world, but of course also quite directly and immediately through the satellite and the communication, the fact that we are 600 million people watching the same television program. This surely must make us feel close.
What difference will that make about a sense of proximity? I mean, has television made people in the world feel that they have more in common, do you think?
I would think when they have a common program, it has. And if one can communicate, when one meets people and one has seen the same television program, I think television is bringing people in England closer together, different kinds of persons.
But if we all, Professor Trevor Roper, if we all see I Love Lucy, does that do anything to our sense of each other's existence?
I don't think it does. For centuries there's been a united Christendom. Let's say we've all thought that we believed the same things about the structure of the world, the outer world, the universe. That didn't stop us during those years of Christian unity from all fighting each other all the time. I do not see why the mere fact that we're all, as it were, watching the same play should make us feel the same as each other. We're not.
I'm surprised Professor Trevor Roper thinks that we've had a united Christendom.
I mean a united set of doctrines.
No, surely the point is here that progress has been terribly slow and uncertain over this million years, and that for every small Genghis Khan, Tamburlaine, Hitler, we have very few Michelangelos, Beethovens, P.G. Woodhouses to offer in exchange. The thing has been very uncertain. Now, however, we are there thanks to two basic 8 characteristics, one of which is curiosity and the other of which is tribalism. Whether this will develop into anything more, I don't know. I hope sincerely it will. But at the moment, among other things, all right, it's a great adventure, but it's also a triumph for big business, isn't it?
Has the expansion of man, his desire to conquer the unknown and to combat himself against natural forces, necessarily allied itself in history with a more enlightened view of his dilemmas?
But don't you think that we're talking about something a little different here? And that is, this is the first time in which human beings have had the sense of their planetary system as a single system, of an interdependence in which everybody can be involved in the same kind of disaster. In other words, the idea of getting away cheap, the idea of fighting a war and getting away with it, is, I think, contradicted not only by the picture of that glowing little orb, which I come back to, this Earthrise, this little planet, but also our increasing knowledge of our ecosystems, the way that we can pollute, the way in which nuclear destruction drifts, the way in which all these things are carried by our physical organism. I maintain that that is made more clear by the vision from the moon, which is what we're talking about.
Professor Trevor Roper, do you think that's true, or do you think that seeing the world like this creates a radical change in our imagination?
I don't, I'm afraid.
I can't follow it myself.
I do not see why it should make any difference that for a century, 2 centuries, we have known, or we have assumed, that the system of the universe is, as it is now proved to be by our recent discoveries. Now, therefore, we are not surprised. We have all round this table stated that we were not really surprised when we saw the men walking on the moon. We admired it, we were interested in it, we watched it entranced, but we were not surprised, because we knew that the moon was roughly like that. We don't live in a Ptolemaic world in which we think that our Earth is the center of the universe. What has been proved has simply confirmed the cosmology of the last 2 centuries. We have not had a shock to our imagination which will cause us to think anew about our position in the universe.
Do you think that, does anybody think that the argument of Abernethy in the film we saw is a valid one, that while going to the moon at the same time more should be done on Earth, or perhaps of the more extreme people that it's a waste of money, vast sums of money, when there is misery, injustice and so on down here?
Well, if I might begin, I would say, first of all, that compared with the resources available to the developed world, the amount being spent is very small indeed. It's perhaps it's less than 1% of America's gross national product, and as she grows by 3 to 4% a year, she's spent what she gets extra between Christmas and Easter. So let's get the idea that it's very big. It's very small. The appalling hemorrhage of waste is in the arms programs, which go up to 140 billions a year. So it's small. Where I think it could make a difference is whether, rather as Dr. Thomas Paine was saying, if citizens will begin to say, if this kind of concentrated spending, planning and intelligence can produce something as good as this, then for heaven's sake you can make the traffic move. And that kind of political change is a change in the way people imagine their own politics.
But are they able to work imaginatively outside the brackets of facts? I mean, we know now that the men landing on the moon are the product of a strategic and prestige struggle between America and Russia. This is a military program that has caused and made this possible.
But yes, I think this business of whether they can work outside this accumulation of knowledge is the crux of the matter. There is a time in scientific research, in technology, when money poured in produces a profit or produces a result, a success. And I'm sure that if, as Lady Jackson has said, the money is really quite small, I'm sure that if an equally good case could be made that the technology is now available, the only thing needed is the money to solve this particular sociological problem, it will be provided.
But why isn't it provided?
Because the case has not been made in general for that a solution can be found which depends only on money.
But I find myself a little in disagreement there, I must say, because we have also got in our market economies of the Western world the idea that this massive kind of concentrated spending, which depends upon government decision, which involves the private sector, but is government directed, is confined pretty well to arms and to some extent education. We have not, in fact, made the decision for our city building, where most of the human race is going to live, that the city should command that kind of concentrated attention. Now, I would like to believe, and I do believe, that conceivably the success of this moon thing could produce this switch where people say, if you can do it for the moon, you can do it for New York.
But why should that happen? I'm sorry, you haven't. You said you think it might, and you hope it will, but have you actually been able to give any evidence that it could, in view of our knowledge of human nature and history?
All I can say is that Thomas Paine begins to say it, and that's different from him not saying it.
Well, can we take an example of someone who has said this sort of thing? For instance, Herman Kahn and the Hudson Institute produced a perfectly feasible plan for developing the Amazon basin, which is a sort of large-scale project that we might well approve of. And this would provide Great Lakes within the Amazon basin, by which means you would stop the Amazon flooding, you would open up the interior round the lakes for industry and agriculture, you would give the inland states in South America, such as Bolivia and Paraguay, access to the sea, you would have enormous hydroelectric power, etc., etc. But it's not only a case of pouring in the money. For one thing, the Brazilians wouldn't like it, because they, after all, have their own government and their own country to run. I think that this is different from the moon. The moon was one single target that could be solved through technology and big business. I think that if we're talking about sociological problems, as I think you are, Lady Jackson, then this is much more difficult because it involves larger areas of mankind.
Does anybody think that there is a danger that in going to the moon, men will be, and indeed going on to other planets perhaps, men will be flying away from their essential responsibilities here? Again, as often has happened in history, avoiding reality.
No, I don't at all.
No.
I think, in fact, of course, the actual part of the sum of money which has been spent, which got us to the moon and did nothing else, is relatively small. The terrific amount of technological development.
I'm sorry, you misunderstand me. I mean, is it possible that psychically, psychologically and spiritually, man will distract himself willingly from enormous problems about his whole life on Earth here, which are very critical at the moment, by flying into the stars? Is there any danger that this will take his mind off problems which all of us ought to be trying to solve now?
Yes, I think there's a danger of that. I think that the danger in particular is that technology will become enthroned as the new religion, and that it may well be taking over now, and that this tremendous triumph for technology may merely lead to a thirst for more technology. I think this is very dangerous. At the same time, we're a bit writing off the moon. All right, they're only now coming back, but it may be that this very day new sciences are born that will surprise us all and will indeed work towards the benefit of humanity. For instance, they put their little flag up to record the solar wind. Who knows what they will find from that?
Do you think that the world has suddenly been divided into a new kind of underdeveloped man, i.e. us sitting around this table, and a very small organized group of developed people, that is the Americans and the Russians?
Well, they're the overdeveloped world.
No.
They're surely the overdeveloped
The Americans,
world.
we're grateful, very grateful to the Americans for providing the technology to do this, and I am participating in it and enjoying it as much as any American is. I am as interested in the results as anyone. 15 laboratories in Britain are hoping to get some of the moon samples which are coming over. We're glad that they're doing it. It would be a complete waste of time for us to try to do the same thing, complete waste of money too.
Besides, it seems to me that on both these questions, the great menace from technology and the great menace from the Russians and the Americans are their ridiculous arms race. I mean, a thing like MERV, this multiple re-entry, whatever it is, which is going to have 20 nuclear bombs and 20 times overkill, where once we had to be content with 8. That's where the menace lies. And if, for heaven's sake, if the moon race and the exploration of the planets get some of these wild boys thinking not about blowing up this planet, but about getting to other planets, then I say it's an enormous advantage, and it's the proper use of technology. I mean, that's my feeling.
Yes, and those are precisely the projects on which the money would be spent if it weren't spent on the...
Am I not right in thinking, however, that the American space project and moon project was launched by President Kennedy quite consciously and deliberately to get the better of the Russians?
Yep.
In the same sense in which, in a more sinister way, you might say, arms were being accumulated by both sides, so space technology is accumulated. What is the difference?
Well, it's the difference, perhaps, between having two knights running at each other in a tourney and saying, we will now settle who gets the estate, and everybody socking everybody. In other words, I think that this kind of competition could be valuable, but I'm interrupting.
No worse than the World Cup.
Yes.
Well, one has to face the fact.
The World Cup isn't played with an atomic bomb, I presume.
But it has a national effort behind it nowadays. Money is spent on training the athletes to do this, and it's a very harmless way compared with a war.
Can we get back for a moment, Professor Trevor Roper, to the problem of the power involved in this achievement? Do you think there's any likelihood, Lady Jackson appears not to, that the world will have to accept an arrangement of power dictated by a very small group of people in the end with elite technocratic knowledge?
I don't think it's a necessary consequence. I can see that it could happen, but it seems to me that these vast accumulations of technological power need an enormously widespread human base. And it is at the base, not at the summit of power, that a redistribution can take place. Mr. Payne on the program recently pointed this out when he pointed out that these enterprises, though this particular one was centered in America, in fact draws on the talent of the world.
But it only draws it, does it not, to Moscow or to Washington or to Florida? Can it dispense it the other way, in fact?
But the people at the base remain human beings. And
it's their relation to power that changes. That's what I'm asking.
Their relation to power may change. They may be enslaved by power.
Quite.
That is always a danger. On the other hand, surely the real battle is to maintain people's humanity, to stop people from becoming robots. It is always possible that great technological changes will enslave people. It's, I think, a 19th century illusion to suppose that all scientific progress is necessarily good.
But what is your bet on this particular issue? I mean, in the next 50 years?
I don't think one can bet. I think perpetual vigilance is the answer, not betting.
But if I may put it quickly, I meant that the danger of enslavement comes much more from technological weapons than from the moon race. In other words, I was not saying there was no danger, but I think we're forgetting all the time that this vast technology is being used for utter destruction, and the moon is not that.
The moon is a relatively innocent branch of general technological change.
But surely the point that you're trying to make there is that we may not be consulted. And I believe that the point about the space race is that even the American public was not consulted. In fact, President Kennedy invited his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, in, and they asked a few big business experts in and got cracking. There was no democratic process involved, as far as I can see.
But Congress had to vote the money, so come. I mean, if Congress had really sensed an absolute groundswell of no, Congress would have been delighted to have put a stop to President Kennedy before he died. You know, I mean, they were very against him. So I think you must not say it was not democratic unless you say Congress isn't. Well,
yes, but I would think that it was somewhat parallel to the Concord, where, you know, there was no general consultation.
I would like to take up a point of Professor Roper's, because I think we're getting awfully confused between between technology and science. Professor Trevor Roper said that it had been shown in the 19th century, or he believed from the evidence of the 19th century, that all scientific progress was not necessarily good. I would debate that to my dying breath, because science is knowledge, and I believe that the acquisition of knowledge must be good. Truth and knowledge must be good. The application of anything, whether it's knowledge or old technology, is something quite separate from that and can be bad.
Technological rather than scientific.
Yes, well, I think it's a very important distinction which must be made. It's a distinction which it's a difficulty we're running in all the time in assessing this program. There is no scientific value at the moment in Apollo 11. I don't think anyone thinks so. It's technological.
You're going to wait and gratefully receive some moon rocks, you say. Well, now, you don't seem to mind the idea that Britain, that our society, is excluded virtually for the first time since the 17th century from a major forward movement of inquiry or discovery in the world. Do you think seriously that it doesn't matter to the generation growing up now, that it can't be involved physically and feel itself involved in this, but is merely a spectator to a television set?
But it is involved, as I've said. It will be involved in the examination of the samples and the possibility of sending experiments. One of the experiments was Australian, that went up anyway. Sending experiments in future Apollo missions, and there are going to be 10 more already. They're already stacked up. It's very much involved, and surely we're all involved in. The fact that Galileo wasn't an Englishman doesn't worry me in the least. I still admire what
I'm talking about now, not history. I mean, isn't it like being in...
This is history.
Well, you don't mind the sense of being a sort of Frenchman in the Roman Empire in the sort of 4th century, whose the decisions about whose life are taken elsewhere.
I don't feel it at all.
Oh, I feel it to a certain extent, yes. Just to be purely parochial, I'm sorry that we haven't lobbed some satellites up from Great Britain by now, as I think we could have done.
Well, if we're doing something different and new, yes, but if we're just tagging along behind in a rather poor second, it's a complete waste of time.
Aren't we possibly seeing the emergence of a scientific community which is human? Isn't this one of the great symbols of the moon, potentially?
How, yes, well now, what evidence have you got for saying it's human? I was listening yesterday, I'm quite prepared to believe you, but I was listening yesterday to the communications passing between the astronauts and ground control. But the only person I could understand at all was President Nixon, in fact.
Well, you know, I think scared by the Russians, provided with an enormous amount of information by the Germans, sending up a rocket from a nation that is more mixed with every kind of race than any other. To me, there is something symbolic of man on the moon as being human, and an earthling being a person, and that this sense of the future is something which I feel in my imagination, and I find it
and I
with
think
young.
This is the proper scientific spirit. I dislike this scientific nationalism which you seem to be encouraging us to express.
Yes. I think we are humans, and I think that...
What I'm really, let me put it more clearly, I'm not encouraging you to express scientific nationalism, but to inquire into what happens when smaller and smaller and more powerful units of organization in the world achieve greater and greater technological mastery in a certain way which is denied to other people. Now, this may be inevitable, but surely it is not simply nationalism to inquire into its effects on us.
No, I don't think it's only nationalism. Sorry, can I just come back? I think it's this rather alarming division within each individual, not only nations, of the heart and the head. The head seems to be going ahead too fast for the heart at the moment.
Do you think that technology is dragging us along so fast that we aren't able to form a mature mentality to cope with its effects?
I think it increases the latent schizophrenia in us. Simply because I think we are still neotenous apes, you know. We've only had 1 million years to go.
There are times when the heart has gone ahead faster than the head, and they've generally been much more disastrous.
Yes, well, quite so. Then what we need is something that will draw the two together, so that they go ahead together.
Lady Jackson, if there is, by any chance, a basic flaw in the makeup of human beings, which causes schizophrenia, which causes this twofold possibility, reaching for the stars on the one hand and being dragged down by self-destruction on the other, what, assuming you accept that proposition, what effect will this exploration have on it? The basic dilemma of man, that he appears not to be able to reconcile himself with himself.
I feel it can be good. I am terrified. I am terrified by his arms, by his nuclear destruction, by what they're inventing in the whole atomic race. And I somehow feel that to do something out of this planet, which gives us back the sense of how vulnerable the little launching pad that's available to all of us is, could conceivably make us less lunatic in our gross misuse of technology through nuclear war. In other words, I see this as perhaps a prophetic sign that we are very small and we can destroy ourselves completely. I could be wrong, but this is how I see it.
Do you think that state of euphoria, which now a lot of people share with you, will last for very long once it's gone out of the newspaper?
I don't feel euphoric. I feel so measurelessly depressed about what the human race is up to now that I only say, with a grinding of my teeth on bare hope, that possibly this is a sign.
You felt a bit euphoric as a porter, didn't you?
Not euphoric. Just hopeful, which is quite different.
I think so. But this is just one particular example. Yes. I think one of the greatest things that man does is the search to answer the great questions, the really important questions of where he is, what he is, why he's here, the purpose. To try to find the purpose. Because this is our basic trouble the whole time. Even the rather deep problems which we try to solve eventually always drive us down to the last ultimate question: what is the purpose of it all? And this is only a tiny little step. Apollo 11 is the tiniest little step. But I think it is a step.
I suppose the final question, therefore, for us should be, is it a step which throws significant light on that question? What is the purpose of life which ends in death? I mean, does it throw light on that?
Well, I think it might throw an immediate, quick bit of light as a result if we find some organic material in these samples, but really it's a step to Mars and other heavenly bodies which will throw more light.
Or even from where we started with the amoeba, upwards to where we are and possibly beyond.
Thank you all very much.
Well, from those cosmic thoughts to the three men actually whizzing round the moon. Geoffrey Pardo, what's the latest news? What are the moments now to watch for?
Well, all is going very well, and at this minute they're just tidying up their orbit into a circular orbit about 15 nautical miles below Columbia, which is circling 60 nautical miles above the moon. The thing to watch out for now, of course, is about 10:15 this evening when they rendezvous between Eagle and Columbia, and 10:30 when they dock. Then in the early hours of tomorrow morning they'll jettison Eagle, which has done them so well getting down to the surface, and that will go into orbit around the Sun forever. And then the critical time at about 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, when all three astronauts in Columbia, in the Kamal module, will light up the engine to put them into the orbit, the trans-Earth orbit, which brings them back to the Earth. They do have the option, actually, of electing to stay for another 5 orbits, about 10 hours, and have a rest. Frankly, I don't think they will. So I think the key thing now to look for is about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning and starting the journey back to Earth.
Geoffrey Pardo, thank you very much. And with that report, with those earlier thoughts on man's first visit to the moon, that concludes tonight's Panorama. And so we come to the end also of the 1968-69 Panorama year. We'll be with you again in September. And I've suddenly realized that tonight happens to complete my 10th year with this program. Thank you for watching. On behalf of my colleagues, see you on Monday, September the 8th. Good night.